The era that follows the Civil War is what's known as Reconstruction, and it lasts between basically 1865 to 1877, although we're going to see that it starts really in 1863. I'll explain that in a later slide. But nonetheless, when the United States finishes the war, when it emerges victorious, we're going to see that two questions have been resolved. The first question, of course, is the compact theory of the Constitution. If you remember your 1301, your U.S. History 1, you might have heard about this. And basically what it is the idea that the Union is little more than a compact, an agreement between the states to voluntarily join together. Well, if you can voluntarily join something, like, say, a gym, can you not voluntarily leave it? So that's, and so this is a way of describing secession in a really convoluted and euphemistic way. Basically, it's just the right of a state to leave the Union. The Civil War, and eventually the Supreme Court is going to say no, a state cannot leave the Union. And then, of course, another big issue that's going to be resolved by the Civil War is going to be the issue of slavery. Will the United States exist as half slave and half free? The Civil War said it's going to be all free. Slavery is going to die. Now, there is a popular misconception that slavery dies with the Emancipation Proclamation. But let's consider something. How many slaves does the Emancipation Proclamation actually free? The answer is actually 0. Listen, when you hear the words of the proclamation, it basically says that all slaves in rebelling states are henceforth and forever free. So, basically, what if you live in a state that remains loyal to the Union and has slavery? And we do have two. We have Maryland and Delaware. Do they get rid of their slaves? No, they don't. They are not rebelling states, therefore they don't have to free their slaves. But another issue is going to be that the President of the United States is declaring the slaves the property of a foreign power in the minds of the South to be henceforth and forever free. Let me put it in modern day perspective. Let's say the Prime Minister of Canada writes a law outlawing a certain color of t-shirts that can be worn in the United States. Would you follow that law? Would you be like, well, what does the Prime Minister of Canada have anything to do with what I wear? You would more likely follow, a U.S. authority or a state authority, not a foreign authority. Well, that's exactly what Lincoln is doing, is he not? He's freeing the property of other peoples, of other, in other nation. All right, so on a geopolitical level, it doesn't free anybody. But of course, there are people out there that are going to argue, well, no, that's not the point of the Emancipation Proclamation. The overall point is it turns the Civil War and this rebellion into a revolution. And I get that, and that's perfectly valid. But nonetheless, the fact remains, this Emancipation Proclamation frees exactly 0 slaves. What does free slaves is going to be the 13th Amendment, which is going to be basically passed by the end of 1865. Ending slavery on a constitutional level. And one of the reasons why they want to make sure that the 13th Amendment is done is to make sure that the taking away of property that was done during the war, i.e. Emancipation Proclamation, is constitutional. And so slavery is going to be over. And for you trivia buffs out there, if you ever are asked, where is the first time the word slavery appears in the Constitution, you can say the 13th Amendment. It's nowhere in the Constitution. The word slavery, be very, very specific. The word slavery does not exist in the Constitution until we get to the 13th Amendment. But with those two questions solved, whether a state can leave the Union, whether or not the United States is going to remain half slave, half free, it comes 2 more questions that we're going to have to deal with. First of all, what are you going to do with the millions of freedmen, former slaves? They're called freedmen. What are you going to do with them? What exactly does freedom mean? Does it mean civil rights? Does it mean the ability to vote in an election, bear arms, be in public office? What exactly does freedom mean? We're going to find out that the white South is basically going to say freedom basically means you don't work for free. But nonetheless, they're going to try to keep former slaves in a state of slavery as close as possible without violating the 13th Amendment. A second question, of course, is going to be, what are you going to do with this? How are you going to get the states back together? How are you going to get the South back into the Union? After all, we just spent over 600,000 lives. I mean, 625,000 is the most common number of Americans that died in the Civil War, although that's now today considered a conservative estimate. But what are you going to do? How is the United States going to be? How's it going to get put back together? Because not only do you have a political solution, you need to have a political solution, you need an economic solution. The South is in absolute ruins. I tell my face-to-face students to when I show them when I Google search Berlin 1945 and Richmond 1865, and I challenge them, what's the difference? You know, when you see the images of these two cities. Go ahead and do that after this slide. Go ahead and look at Berlin 1945 and Richmond 1865, and then convince me they're two different cities in two different centuries. They're so similar in terms of the destruction. Well, Richmond, of course, is the southern devastation in the most extreme form. After all, Texas is relatively untouched by the war, but nonetheless, it kind of shows you what's going to happen in the South overall. You have a South that's in economic and physical ruin, and you're going to have to rebuild that before you do anything else.